I'm Ashley, 32, and I'm about to tell you how I blew up my marriage because I couldn't handle my own insecurities. I met Michael at my college roommate's wedding in Michigan 3 years ago, and now I'm sitting in my new apartment, which is about half the size of our master bedroom, trying to figure out when I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me. I wasn't even supposed to be at the main table, but another bridesmaid got food poisoning, so I was bumped up, and there he was, sitting across from me in this perfectly tailored navy suit, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He wasn't like the other guys I usually went for, you know, the smooth talkers who'd sweep you off your feet and then ghost you 2 weeks later. Michael owned two restaurants in downtown Detroit, and unlike my ex Dylan, who was always talking about the bar he was going to build someday, Michael had his life together. When asked what he did, he simply said he worked in restaurants. After a string of relationships with guys who couldn't keep their electricity on. Michael's stability was incredibly appealing, and he had this quiet confidence that made me feel safe. Like when he asked for my number, he didn't play any games. I had to learn later from the bride that he had built both places from scratch. He called the next day and invited me to dinner at a cute Italian restaurant downtown, and we moved very quickly after that. Some people thought 6 months was too soon to move in together, but when you know, right? Looking back, maybe I was a little too eager to merge our lives. I'd been working at Nordstrom for a few years, and while I was good at my job, watching Michael run his businesses made me feel, I don't know, like I'd finally found my ticket to the life I desired. He didn't seem to mind that I had expensive taste. Actually, he thought it was sweet at first how thrilled I'd get about my designer purchases. You work hard, you deserve nice things, he'd remark, and that's what I liked about him. He never made me feel terrible for desiring the nicer things in life, unlike my ex who would roll his eyes every time I came home with a shopping bag. We married after a year, and it was almost ideal. I'd intended a bigger wedding, but Michael insisted on a more intimate one. He said it made more sense to put the money toward a down payment on a house, which should have been my first indication that we regarded money differently. But I was too caught up in the romanticism of it all to notice. The first year was like a dream. Michael's businesses were doing well. We bought this lovely colonial in a beautiful suburb, and I felt like I'd finally made it. No more counting days till money or sharing a small apartment with roommates. I had a walk-in closet that was bigger than my first bedroom, and a spouse who didn't mind if I wanted to redo the entire first floor. But as they say, when something appears too good to be true, it probably is. I began to notice minor things. Michael would spend hours going over the restaurant's books, but barely glance at our joint credit card statement. Or he'd light up talking about his plans to expand the business, but zone out when I talked about the new Gucci collection. I tried to get involved in his work life by attending industry events and charity dinners, but standing there in my carefully chosen outfits, listening to everyone talk about profit margins and overhead costs, I felt like an outsider. These people had degrees in business and hospitality management, and there I was, the girl who dropped out of community college after 3 semesters because it was too boring. As Michael became more successful, I found myself shopping to feel better. I opened a couple of credit cards in only my name, not because I was hiding anything, but because I didn't want to worry him with the specifics. I bought a new dress for each occasion, shoes that matched, and bags that demonstrated my place in his world. In retrospect, I can see how that great beginning wasn't so perfect after all. But here's the problem. When you're so focused on keeping up appearances and trying to be the person you think your husband deserves, you miss the cracks that are forming underneath. I was so busy trying to fit into Michael's world that I didn't realize I was slowly destroying my place in it. I wish I'd seen what I see now, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The real troubles hadn't even begun, and Michael's business was about to expand much further, and I was about to find just how insecure I really was. That second year of marriage was when things really started to change. Michael got this opportunity to create a third restaurant, and it was as if I had become invisible. He'd come home late, fatigued, barely finishing his supper before falling asleep on the couch. When I tried to tell him about my day, he'd just nod along while browsing through emails on his phone. I understand. Running a restaurant is difficult, but what about running a marriage? My friend Rachel would often tell me how fortunate I was. At least Michael is working and not sitting at home playing video games like my ex. And yes, I knew she was right, but she didn't have to sit alone at dinner parties, making excuses for why her husband was missing again. She didn't have to watch her friends' husbands bring them surprise lunches at work. While her own husband forgot their anniversary due to a supplier crisis, I began spending more time at the mall during my work breaks. There's something about buying something new that makes you feel better, as if each purchase was filling a growing void inside me. I tell myself I needed to appear like a successful restaurant owner's wife, How would it look if I wore the same dress twice to his business? Dinners? The credit card bills were getting scary, but I kept telling myself it was only temporary. Once Michael's new restaurant was up and running, things would return to normal. He'd start paying attention to me again, and we'd laugh about how difficult. This period had been besides, his business was going well, so we could afford it. At least that's what I told myself every time I increased the limit on my secret cards. It didn't help that everyone was raving about Michael's success. Your husband is such a genius with restaurants, they'd remark, or you must be so pleased. Of his success, and I was truly, but would it kill people to ask about my life sometimes? It's as if I'd become Michael's wife instead of Ashley. I tried talking to him about it once. I waited until he was home for dinner, made his favorite food, and attempted to explain how lonely I felt. You know what he said? Maybe you should consider going back to school and finding something you're passionate about. That's when I realized how much we differed. I felt as if my sentiments weren't valid until I was ambitious as him, as if being successful at my profession and desiring my husband's attention weren't sufficient. Michael got excited about spreadsheets and profit margins, whereas I got excited about the new seasonal collections at work and planning dinner parties he'd most likely miss. He'd get up at 5 a.m. to meet with suppliers, while I'd stay up late watching reality TV because at least those couples spent time together. Worst thing was witnessing my friends' marriages and wondering where we went wrong. Rachel's husband may not have his own business, but he was there for Taco Tuesdays and weekend brunches. Even my younger sister's boyfriend, who worked as a mechanic, took her on regular dates. Meanwhile, I was lucky if Michael made it home in. Time to say goodnight, so I started dressing up more when I visited him at restaurants, thinking he'd notice. New clothing, flawless makeup, the works. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. But he'd just give me a distracted kiss and go back to whatever crisis needed his attention. The only time he seemed to notice what I was wearing was when the credit card statement arrived. And even then, he was too busy to do anything more than raise an eyebrow and mutter something about discussing it later. Of course, he never showed up later. He was too preoccupied with vendor meetings, staff training, menu planning, and other things that took precedence over me, and I began to wonder if I wasn't successful enough for him anymore. Maybe he regretted marrying someone who folded sweaters for a career, while he was out there building an empire. Looking back, I can see that I was drowning in my own fears. But at the moment, all I could think about was the widening distance between us. And then he hired Emma, and everything I'd been suppressing, all those concerns and doubts, erupted in the worst way conceivable. Emma. Just speaking her name makes my gut tight. She walked into our lives with her perfectly pressed blazers and her MBA from Michigan State. And Michael suddenly had all the time in the world for business meetings. I remember the first time I met her at the restaurant staff party. She was younger than me, maybe 28, with a no-nonsense attitude and not a hair out of place. No designer labels, just clean-cut professional clothes that presumably came from Express or whatever. The way Michael presented her made my skin crawl. Emma is going to revolutionize how we run things, he said, grinning like a happy parent. She has excellent ideas for expansion. I stood there in my new Laubaudens that had maxed out my Nordstrom card, feeling like a little girl playing dress-up, at first trying to be friendly. I'd stop by the restaurant with lunch for Michael, only to find them huddled over laptops speaking the secret language of profit margins and market analysis. Emma would always be so polite, so professional, calling me Mrs. Anderson, even after I told her to call me Ashley. In retrospect, maybe her politeness made it worse, as if she was this perfect employee. While I was just the wife who didn't understand my husband's world, I started noticing little things, like how Michael's face would light up when she presented fresh ideas at meetings. He'd mention her name at dinner. Emma suggested, and he'd never skip a meeting if she was in charge, but he'd been too busy to attend my nephew's birthday party the weekend before. The texts started coming in, and they were always about work, but they came at all hours. Great meeting today at 10 p.m. Thrilled about tomorrow's presentation at 6 a.m. I began checking his phone when he was sleeping. I'm not proud of it, but told me you wouldn't do the same. The texts were all professional, but they had this energy to them. Michael had lost his excitement for anything else, especially for me. One night, I overheard him on the phone with her, laughing over an inside joke about their supplier's poor 2P. I couldn't recall the last time he laughed like that with me. I began to continually compare myself to her. She had a business degree, whereas I had an unfinished associate's degree, and she could discuss wine pairings and meal pricing. I still couldn't figure out which wine glass was for red and which for white. She helped him construct his goal, while I just spent his money. Rachel attempted to be sympathetic, but I could tell she thought I was being paranoid. They work together, Ashley, so they communicate a lot, but she didn't notice how he looked at Emma during staff meetings, as if she was the only person in the room who spoke his language, or how Emma always seemed to know what Michael needed before he asked whether it was a spreadsheet or his preferred coffee order. I began driving by the restaurants at random times to check in. I'd tell myself I was being a supportive wife, but what I really wanted was confirmation that I wasn't insane, that there was something going on. I'd sit in my car, working late into the night, watching them through the windows. The intimacy was there in every shared laugh, animated chat, and eager gesture over some paper I definitely wouldn't comprehend. Then came the surprise SMS. I saw it flash up on his phone one morning when he was in the bathroom. Everything is ready for the surprise next week. I can't wait to see your face, of course. From Emma. My hands shook as I read it, my mind racing. With possibilities, a private dinner, a secret rendezvous. It didn't matter, that part of me knew I was being unreasonable. All I could think about was them together, sharing something that didn't involve me. I couldn't take the late nights, hidden texts, and the way they seemed to share this entire world that I wasn't a part of. That's when I began plotting how I'd approach them. I didn't have proof, but I had something better, conviction, and I was ready to shatter their entire world, even if it meant ruining mine. I chose a Tuesday night to do it. Michael's main restaurant was always packed on Tuesdays. Thanks to a weekly special Emma had apparently suggested, I dressed like I was going to battle in my tightest black dress, highest heels, full makeup, and the expensive perfume Michael had given me last Christmas. Even though he probably didn't remember buying it, Rachel tried to talk me out of it, saying, "Ashley, think about what you're doing." But what was there to think about? I had proof, sort of. I had the text about the surprise, the late night meetings, and the fact that he had changed his phone password last month. It all added up if you looked at it right. I waited until they were in the middle of dinner service. Wanted everyone to see Emma for who she really was, this homewrecker in sensible shoes who thought she could steal my husband. I walked into that restaurant like I owned it, which technically I kind of did because I was his wife. And there they were in his office, door wide open, head bent over some paperwork. Emma was pointing to something on the desk, and Michael was nodding with that familiar, excited look on his face that used to be reserved for me. They didn't even notice me at first, too preoccupied with whatever fascinating spreadsheet they were reviewing. So this is the surprise, huh? My voice came out shakier than I planned. They both looked up, surprised by the secret meetings, late night texts, and continual work conversations. Michael stepped up slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. "Ashley, what are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb with me, Michael." I read the text about the surprise, and I know what's been going on. Emma began gathering her papers, her cheeks flushed. "Mrs. Anderson, I believe there has been a mistake." "Don't you Mrs. Anderson me?" I was shouting now, all my carefully rehearsed allegations tumbling out in a jumble. "I've seen how you look at him, how you're always there, so polished, professional, and understanding." "Ashley, stop." Michael's voice had that warning tone, the one he used when I overspent on my credit card. "You're embarrassing yourself. That's when I really lost it. What about you? Sneaking around with your little business prodigy when your wife is at home alone." Emma walked forward, her hands up as if she were surrendering. "Mrs. Anderson, the surprise is the new restaurant site. We're opening a 4th location, and we've been keeping it quiet because we're still in negotiations. Michael intended to surprise you with the news at the investor dinner next week, and I recall the room tilting sideways. Michael spoke quietly, dissatisfied, to her girlfriend Sarah, whom you had met twice. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear dishes clattering in the kitchen, conversations in the dining room, and the entire restaurant continuing to function while my world imploded. Emma's face was a mixture of pity and embarrassment, and it made me want to crawl under the desk and disappear. Michael responded, still in that incredibly quiet voice, "I think you should go home. We'll talk about this later." I've read your text, and I tried one more time, but even I could tell how feeble it sounded. Emma softly slid out of the office, leaving us alone with the debris of what I'd done. The late nights, the meetings, the texts you read by searching through my phone while I slept. His eyes were cold now. "You know about the meetings because you've been tracking my location." The truth hit me then, not only about how wrong I'd been about them, but also about how my own worries and suspicions were steadily killing my marriage. "Michael, I started," but he raised his hand. "I can't look at you right now." I drove home in a haze. My perfect confrontation had turned into a perfect nightmare, and the worst part was that some tiny twisted part of me still wanted to blame them for making me feel so uncomfortable in the first place. If only Michael hadn't been so aloof, if Emma hadn't been so flawless, Michael wouldn't have returned home that night. On the 3rd day, he arrived with boxes and a blank expression, something I had never seen before. He didn't yell. That was worse. He just started packing his things while I followed him around the house, trying to explain, apologize, and make him understand how everything had looked from my perspective. I found the credit card statements, he finally said, not even looking at me as he folded his shirts into a suitcase, all of them. My stomach fell. What do you mean? He brought out a folder, which was obviously organized and labeled, and dropped it on the bed. Ashley, 4 secret credit cards, $43,000 in debt that you never told me about. And you have the nerve to accuse me of dishonesty. I tried to explain the pressure I felt about needing to look the part of a successful restaurant owner's wife, but the words sounded hollow even to me. He just kept packing methodically as if he were closing down one of his restaurants for the night. The flat is paid for until the end of the month, he replied, zipping up his suitcase. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the rest. That's when reality hit me. Wait, what apartment? The one you'll be moving into. I'm keeping the house since it's in my name and I can prove I paid all of the bills. You should be grateful that I am covering the first and final month's rent somewhere else. Of course, he was correct about everything. The mansion was his. My life had been constructed on his success and my falsehoods, but it didn't stop me from feeling like a victim in some way. I mean, if he'd been more attentive, would I have needed to shop to feel better? If he hadn't worked so much, would I have become so paranoid? Rachel stopped answering my calls after that. It turned out she and her husband had been at the restaurant that night and had witnessed the entire thing. You need help, Ashley, she texted me. Professional help. It was as if she had never been envious or insecure in her life. It was simple for her to pass judgment because her spouse was constantly nearby. She had no idea what it was like to compete. With someone like Emma, moving into the apartment was a rude awakening for me, as it replaced my walk-in closet with a tiny area that couldn't hold half of my expensive apparel. There was no fancy kitchen with the pricey coffee machine Michael had imported from Italy. No guest room for my sister to stay in when she visited. Just a one-bedroom walk-up that shouted, "Start over," in the worst manner. The first time I went to use my credit card at Nordstrom after moving out, it was refused. Michael had called the company and described the situation. Apparently, when you open credit cards using your husband's income without his knowledge, they take a pretty dim view of that. Who knew? I had to get a second job at a coffee shop just to make the minimum payments on my cards. Do you know how humiliating it is to serve lattes to people wearing the kind of clothes you used to own? To see them check their designer watches while waiting for their orders, knowing you had to sell yours to make rent? Emma was promoted to regional manager. In the meantime, I was living on ramen and store-brand coffee, trying to figure out how things had gone so wrong. I discovered this from a common acquaintance who had no idea they weren't supposed to talk to me anymore. The fourth location, the surprise that had started the whole thing, opened to excellent reviews. During one of her lectures on responsibility and living within one's means, my mother reminded me that you can't construct a life based solely on appearances. It's easy for her to say. She's been wearing the same Payless shoes for the past 10 years and has no idea what it's like to feel inadequate. To need those material things to feel worthy. The worst part? Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I catch myself wondering if I did this on purpose, as if some part of me knew the marriage was falling apart anyway, and it was easier to blow it up spectacular than to admit I wasn't cut out for Michael's life. But that's the kind of idea you push aside in the morning, when you have to wake up and face another day of repercussions. It's been 6 months now. 6 months of attempting to date men who don't compare to Michael. 6 months of watching his restaurants prosper without me. 6 months of having to live with being the villain in everyone else's story, and I tried dating. Trevor, a guy from the coffee shop where I work, he was sweet, always bringing me little treats from the bakery next door and telling me I was beautiful, even in my polyester work uniform. But he lived with 2 roommates and drove a beat-up Honda, and I couldn't help but compare him to Michael. How pathetic is that? I'm the one who messed everything up, and I still believe I deserve better than a barista with student loans. Last week, I drove past the main restaurant. I tell myself it was on my route to the grocery store, but that's a lie. I go out of my way to pass by there. Emma's car was in the parking lot, that practical Subaru that probably gets fantastic gas mileage, and I sat there for nearly an hour, watching people go in and out, recalling when I used to be a part of that world. By the way, Michael is doing great. I'm still paying off those credit cards, one minimum payment at a time. And Emma's girlfriend, now wife, handles their social media marketing. The 4th location is already profitable, and they're considering expanding to Ann Arbor. My therapist, who I finally started seeing because the court ordered it after Michael's lawyer brought up the stalking, tells me that I need to take responsibility for my actions. She wants me to write lists of my damaging behaviors and bad thought patterns. As if writing out excessive purchasing and paranoid tendencies will miraculously heal everything. The truth is that I miss him, and not only his lifestyle, which I miss as well, but the way he used to look at me before everything went wrong, before Emma, before the debt. before I turned into this crazy person who monitored his phone and read his texts. I sometimes wonder if he misses me as well, but then I recall the look on his face that night at the restaurant. And I know better. My sister suggests that I write him a letter apologizing for everything. It might help you move on, but what would I say? Sorry I accused you of cheating. Sorry I maxed out secret credit cards. Sorry I couldn't handle feeling like I wasn't good enough for your world. It also is so small and petty now. The dating apps are a joke. Every time I match with someone, I find myself browsing through their profile, looking for red flags. Does he have a decent job, a nice car, or his own place? It's as if I've learned nothing. I'm still trying to shop for the perfect life. Only now I'm looking for guys instead of handbags. My new apartment doesn't seem like home. I've tried to make it nice by buying some artificial plants from Target and hanging up some art pictures, but everything reminds me of what I've lost. The tiny closet that barely fits my remaining designer items, the kitchenette that prevents me from hosting dinner parties, and the view of the parking lot rather than our gorgeous backyard. You want to know the really messed up part? Sometimes I still think it was partly his fault. If he hadn't been so wrapped up in his restaurants, if he hadn't hired Emma, if he had just paid more attention to me. But that's the thing about marriage. It's not just about attention, time, or money. It's about trust. And I lost it long before I walked into his restaurant that night. People keep telling me that this is a learning experience, an opportunity to grow as a person. But what if I don't want to grow? What if I just want my old life back? What if I'm not cut out for this whole self-improvement journey everyone seems to think I need? I saw Rachel at the grocery store the other day, and she pretended not to see me, turning down another aisle with her cart full of organic vegetables and wine. I wanted to run after her and explain that I'm not the insane person she thinks I am, but maybe I am. Maybe I am exactly who everyone thinks I am. The jealous woman who destroyed her marriage because she couldn't deal with her own insecurities. So here I am, recounting this story to everyone who will listen, still unsure whether I am the villain or the victim. Perhaps I am both. And that is what happens when you allow your anxieties to drive you to destroy the best thing in your life. You end yourself alone in a little apartment, working 2 jobs to pay off fashionable items you never should have bought, wondering if you'll ever meet someone who makes you feel as comfortable as Michael did when you made him feel unsafe with you.